Oh my God, the whole thing is an absolute disaster. And I would like to suggest that the Labour government, especially Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner, and Rachel Reeves, read Donald Trump's book, The Art of the Deal.
Mm.
Now, last time I came on, I accused the government of raping the country, and now I'm accusing them of raping businesses. So I think this whole thing is a mess. I don't trust these people at all. I don't know what they're doing, and I fear for the direction of this country. A lot of good people are going to end up leaving. Businesses already scared. I think this whole thing is a
Right, buckle up, because we've just witnessed an absolutely explosive moment in British politics that reveals the deep cracks forming within the Labour Party. Angela Rayner has forced Keir Starmer into a massive climb down over Labour's flagship workers' rights package, and the way this has played out is absolutely humiliating for the Prime Minister. Rayner, who resigned from the cabinet earlier this year, has re-emerged as a powerful voice within the party, and she's just demonstrated that she has more influence than Starmer does when it comes to actual policy. She pressed ministers to speed up the introduction of revised unfair dismissal protections, which are central to Labour's employment rights bill, and she won. The changes will now take effect on January 1st, 2027, months earlier than Starmer wanted. But here's what's really devastating. Rayner was preparing to table an amendment that would have directly challenged Starmer in Parliament, marking her first major backbench intervention since stepping down from cabinet. That would have been an absolute disaster for Starmer, a public humiliation where his own former deputy openly defies him on the floor of the House. So Starmer caved. He agreed to Rayner's demands to avoid that confrontation. He blinked. And now everyone knows that Angela Rayner has more power within the Labour Party than the actual Prime Minister. So how did we get here? What lies did Rayner expose? And what does this tell us about Starmer's grip on power? Let's dive into this Labour civil war. Quick favour before we get into this political explosion. If you're watching this thinking Starmer just got absolutely destroyed by his own party, then hit that subscribe button. Over 92% of you haven't done it yet. It's completely free, takes 2 seconds and helps us massively. Cheers if you did. Right, let's talk about Starmer's humiliating defeat. So let's start with understanding what's actually at stake here, because this isn't just about scheduling or minor policy details. This is about Labour's flagship Employment Rights Bill, one of their major policy promises from opposition. The bill is supposed to strengthen workers' rights, make it easier for employees to claim unfair dismissal, and generally shift the balance of power in the workplace away from employers and towards workers. That's classic Labour territory, the kind of policy that unions love and business groups hate. Angela Rayner helped design these reforms while Labour was in opposition. She was shadow deputy leader and had responsibility for employment policy. She worked with unions, she consulted with workers' groups, she developed proposals that were supposed to transform workers' rights in Britain. And then Labour won the election, and suddenly everything started getting watered down. The original Labour commitment was to give employees the right to claim unfair dismissal from their first day in a job. Day one rights, as they're called. Currently, employees need to work for 2 years before they can claim unfair dismissal. That's a long time to be completely vulnerable with no protection. Labour promised to change that, to give people protection from day one. But then, once they were in government, ministers started backing away from that commitment. They introduced a 6-month qualifying period instead. Not day one, but 6 months. That's still better than 2 years, but it's a massive climb down from the original promise. Business groups were concerned about the costs and administrative burden of day one rights. They argued it would make hiring riskier, that employers would be less willing to take chances on new employees if they could be sued for unfair dismissal immediately. So the government listened to business concerns and watered down the policy. But unions were furious. They insisted that protections must still be substantially strengthened, that 6 months was a compromise too far, that Labour was betraying its core supporters, and Angela Rayner agreed with the unions. She'd designed these policies with day one rights in mind. She'd promised them to workers and union members, and now the government she used to be part of was watering them down. So she started pushing back. She had direct talks with senior ministers, with Business Secretary Peter Kyle, with union leaders, and she made it clear that the implementation needed to happen faster than the government was planning. The government wanted to drag things out, to give businesses more time to prepare, to minimise disruption. But Rayner wanted the changes implemented quickly, to show that Labour was serious about workers' rights, to deliver on promises before the next election. And here's where it gets really interesting. The bill had been held up in the House of Lords. Peers were concerned about various aspects of it, particularly around the unfair dismissal protections. The government was stuck in a legislative deadlock, unable to get the bill through without making concessions. Rayner saw an opportunity. She worked with former Employment Minister Justin Madders, who presumably shares her frustration with how the bill has been handled, Together, they were preparing to table an amendment that would accelerate the implementation timetable. This amendment would have forced a vote in Parliament, would have put Labour MPs in the position of choosing between supporting Starmer or supporting Rayner, and given Rayner's popularity within the party, especially among the more left-wing MPs and union-affiliated members, there was a genuine risk that Starmer would lose that vote, or at least that enough Labour MPs would rebel to make it a humiliating near-miss. Rayner's amendment would have marked her first major backbench intervention since stepping down from cabinet earlier this year, and that's significant because it would have established her as the leader of an internal opposition within Labour. Not just someone grumbling from the sidelines, but someone actively challenging government policy, tabling amendments, forcing votes, making Starmer's life difficult. That's a nightmare scenario for any Prime Minister, but especially for one whose approval ratings are already in freefall. Starmer couldn't afford to be publicly defeated by his former deputy. He couldn't afford to have Labour MPs choosing Rayner over him. So he caved. He agreed to implement the reforms far earlier than originally planned. The changes will now take effect on January 1st, 2027. Not day one rights, that ship has sailed, but a much faster implementation than the government wanted. By agreeing to the earlier start date, Starmer avoided a direct confrontation with Rayner. The Telegraph reported this explicitly, that Starmer agreed to prevent Rayner from challenging him publicly. That's not governing from a position of strength. That's capitulation. That's a Prime Minister so weak that he has to give in to demands from a backbencher, albeit a very powerful backbencher, to avoid being humiliated in Parliament. The new rights will now apply to anyone employed from July 2026. That gives businesses less time to prepare than they wanted, but it gives workers the protection sooner. Government sources have tried to spin this as providing certainty to businesses, ensuring everyone knows when the new rules take effect. But that's transparent nonsense. If the government wanted certainty, they could have announced a clear timetable months ago. This is damage control after being forced into a corner by Rayner. Now let's talk about the other major revision that's buried in all of this, because it's potentially even more significant. High earners who win unfair dismissal cases could be eligible for unlimited compensation under the revised package. Currently, there are caps on how much you can be awarded in an unfair dismissal case. The lower of your annual salary, or a fixed maximum currently set at £118,223, but those caps are being removed. Unlimited compensation. That sounds great for workers, right? Well, maybe not. Darren Newman, an employment law consultant, has cautioned that this decision may encourage large claims from senior professionals, city workers, high-earning executives, senior managers. They could potentially win multi-million-pound payouts if they're unfairly dismissed. And here's the problem with that. Those big claims from wealthy professionals could crowd out cases from lower-paid employees who rely more heavily on tribunal compensation. Employment tribunals have limited capacity. If they're spending months on a complex case involving a banker claiming £3 million in lost earnings, that's time not being spent on cases from warehouse workers or shop assistants who've been unfairly dismissed. So this change, which sounds progressive, might actually end up benefiting the wealthy at the expense of ordinary workers. Right, that's how Angela Rayner forced Keir Starmer into a humiliating climb-down and exposed his weakness. Thanks so much for watching this breakdown of Labour's internal civil war. Make sure you're subscribed because this power struggle is far from over. Until next time, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next one.